The laughter started before the auctioneer even called his name. Dozens of wealthy investors sat comfortably inside the packed county courthouse, dressed in expensive suits and polished shoes. They whispered among themselves as a thin man in worn work boots stepped through the doors holding the hand of a little girl. The man looked exhausted. His jacket was faded. His truck barely ran. And according to everyone in that room, he had absolutely no chance of saving his home. Yet he walked inside anyway. And that was the first mistake the investors made. Because they thought they knew who he was. They had no idea what was about to happen. Ethan Carter hadn't planned on becoming a single father. 5 years earlier, his wife, Sarah, had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving him alone to raise their daughter, Lily. Everything changed overnight. Medical bills piled up. Savings disappeared. The family workshop struggled to stay open. Every month became a battle. Every paycheck disappeared before it arrived. Yet somehow Ethan kept going. For Lily. Always for Lily. The small farmhouse outside town wasn't much to look at. The paint peeled from the walls. The porch leaned slightly to one side. The roof needed repairs. But it was home. It was where Lily took her first steps. Where Sarah planted roses along the fence. Where countless family memories still lived. Now the bank was taking it away. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for 11 o'clock. And everyone expected Ethan to lose. Including the investors who had already decided how much profit they would make from the property. At exactly 11 o'clock, the auction began. Rows of investors filled the room. Property developers, land speculators, real estate companies. Most had never spoken to Ethan. Most had never worked a day in their lives with their hands. But they all knew one thing. The Carter property sat near a rapidly expanding industrial corridor. Land values were expected to explode. The house itself meant nothing. The land beneath it was worth a fortune. And they intended to get it cheap. Very cheap. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Opening bid, $120,000. A paddle immediately rose. Then another. Then another. The bidding climbed rapidly. 130,000. 140,000. 150,000. Ethan sat silently in the back row beside Lily. Several investors glanced over their shoulders and smirked. One man leaned toward his friend. What's he doing here? Watching his house get sold. The group laughed. Ethan heard every word, but said nothing. Because Ethan had spent years learning something important. People reveal themselves when they think you've already lost. And these people were revealing everything. The lead investor was a man named Richard Harlow. Everyone knew him. Luxury cars. Private jets. Political connections. He had bought half the county over the past decade. Whenever someone struggled financially, Harlow appeared. And somehow he always won. Today was supposed to be another easy victory. Richard noticed Ethan watching him. He smiled. The kind of smile predators use. Then he raised his paddle again. 200,000. The room grew quiet. Most investors dropped out. The price was climbing too fast. But Harlow didn't care. He wanted the property. And he wanted Ethan to watch him take it. Meanwhile, Lily squeezed her father's hand. Dad. Ethan looked down. Her eyes were nervous. Were they right? He smiled softly. About what? About us losing? For a moment, Ethan stared toward the auction floor. Then toward the old leather folder resting beside him. The same folder he had carried for nearly 20 years. A folder everyone had forgotten about. Including him. Until 3 weeks earlier. No, Ethan said quietly. They're not right. 3 weeks earlier. Everything had seemed hopeless. The final foreclosure notice sat on the kitchen table. Bills covered nearly every surface. The workshop was days from closing. And Ethan couldn't see a way forward. Then Lily brought him an old box from the attic. Dad, what's this? Dust covered the cardboard lid. Inside were old notebooks. Blueprints. Sketches. Patent documents. And memories. Lots of memories. Because before life fell apart. Before medical debt. Before foreclosure. Before grief. Ethan had been an inventor. Not a famous one. Not a wealthy one. Just a mechanic who loved solving problems. Years earlier, he had developed a unique, energy-efficient industrial cooling system. The design was simple, reliable, and unlike anything else available at the time. He patented it. Tried selling it. Failed. Eventually, he moved on. Or so he thought. One document caught his attention. A patent renewal notice. Still active. Still valid. Still legally his. Ethan stared at it for hours. Then curiosity got the better of him. He made a phone call. That phone call changed everything. A manufacturing attorney returned his call the next day. Then another. Then another. Soon Ethan learned something shocking. A major international corporation had recently developed technology remarkably similar to his forgotten invention. The global market was exploding. Companies were scrambling to acquire patent rights. Millions of dollars were suddenly at stake. Maybe more. Much more. For the first time in years, hope returned. But there was a problem. The auction would happen before any deal could be finalized. Time was running out. Back in the courthouse, bidding reached $260,000. Only Richard Harlow remained. The auctioneer lifted his hammer. $260,000. Going once. Richard smiled. The house was practically his. Going twice. The room fell silent. Then a voice interrupted. $300,000. Every head turned. The room froze. Because the voice belonged to Ethan. The silence lasted several seconds. People exchanged confused looks. Richard frowned. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, did you say 300,000? Ethan stood slowly. That's correct. Whispers immediately spread through the crowd. Someone laughed nervously. Another investor shook his head. This guy doesn't have $300. Richard chuckled, then raised his paddle. 320. The room relaxed. Everyone assumed Ethan's bluff had ended. Except Ethan wasn't bluffing. 400,000. The courthouse exploded with murmurs. Now even the auctioneer looked concerned. Richard's smile disappeared. For the first time all day, something felt wrong. Very wrong. Richard raised his paddle again. 450. Ethan answered instantly. 600,000. Gasps filled the room. One woman nearly dropped her notebook. Several investors turned completely around in their seats. Nobody understood what was happening. How could a struggling mechanic suddenly bid $600,000? Where was the money coming from? Had someone backed him? Won the lottery? Inherited something? The mystery spread through the room like wildfire. Even Lily looked surprised. She stared at her father. Ethan simply squeezed her hand. Trust me. Richard's face hardened. His pride wouldn't allow retreat. Not now. Not in public. 700,000. The room waited. Ethan calmly stood. 1 million. Silence. Absolute silence. You could hear air conditioning vents humming overhead. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The number felt impossible. A man facing foreclosure wasn't supposed to bid $1 million. Yet Ethan had. Without hesitation. Without fear. Without even looking nervous. And suddenly the balance of power shifted. Richard looked shaken. For the first time in years, he wasn't controlling the room. Questions raced through his mind. What did Ethan know? Where had he gotten the money? What secret had everyone missed? Then the courthouse doors opened. Several men in business suits entered carrying briefcases. They moved directly toward Ethan. The crowd watched in confusion. One of the men extended his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry we're late. He turned toward Ethan. Mr. Carter. Ethan nodded. The attorney smiled. The wire transfer has been completed. The room erupted. People began talking over each other. The auctioneer struggled to restore order. Richard looked pale. Wire transfer, someone whispered. How much? The attorney answered before anyone else could ask. $42 million. The room went dead silent again. 42 million. Not 42,000. Not 420,000. $42 million. Several investors genuinely thought they had heard wrong. But they hadn't. The attorney continued. Earlier this morning, Mr. Carter finalized a licensing agreement involving patented industrial cooling technology. Shock spread across every face, especially Richard's, because suddenly everything made sense. The confidence, the bidding, the calm expression, the mystery. Ethan had never been broke. Not anymore. What nobody realized was that the deal had closed less than 2 hours earlier. A forgotten invention, created decades before, ignored by nearly everyone, now worth millions. The same invention born inside the small workshop everyone considered worthless. Richard lowered his paddle. For the first time all day, he couldn't compete. Not financially, not emotionally, not publicly. The power had completely reversed. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Current bid, $1 million. Richard remained silent. Going once. Nothing. Going twice. Nothing. The room watched him. The mighty investor who always won. The billionaire who controlled everything. The man who had spent years taking advantage of struggling families. Now completely powerless. Sold. The hammer struck. The sound echoed through the courthouse. And with it, years of fear disappeared. The home belonged to Ethan. Forever. Lily threw her arms around her father. Tears filled her eyes. "We get to stay?" Ethan smiled. The first genuine smile he'd shown in years. "Yeah." His voice cracked slightly. "We get to stay." Many people expected Ethan to celebrate, to brag, to humiliate Richard the way Richard had humiliated others. But he didn't, because that wasn't who he was. Instead, he walked toward Richard. The entire room watched, waiting, wondering what he would say. Ethan stopped in front of him. Richard couldn't even meet his eyes. Then Ethan spoke quietly. "So many people spend their lives trying to buy things." Richard said nothing. Ethan glanced toward Lily, then toward the courthouse window overlooking the family farm. "But the things that matter most." He paused. "Can't be bought." Then he walked away, leaving Richard standing alone, defeated, not by money, but by character. Months later, Ethan rebuilt the workshop. The patent business expanded. New jobs came to town. Families found work. The community flourished. The farmhouse stayed exactly where it had always been. Sarah's roses bloomed again. Lily laughed on the porch every evening. And the story spread across the county. Not because a poor man became rich, but because a man everyone underestimated discovered that his greatest value had never been his money. It was his persistence, his integrity, and his refusal to quit when the world expected him to fail. Because sometimes the people who appear to have nothing are quietly holding something priceless, something powerful, something the world won't recognize until it's too late. And on the day they mocked the poor single dad at the auction, they learned that lesson the hard way.